We are going to be working with a problem that can be solved using a linear inequality. The clue to us in the problem is that the words at least 20% show up. So this at least is a little verbal clue that we want 20% or more. And so that idea that it could be equal to 20% or it could be greater than leads us to making an inequality. The fact that it asks us how many pounds of each yarn, that leads us to believe that there will be two variables in the problem, and that would make it an x and y, or a linear equation. So let's take a look at all the details. First thing I notice is that there's two blends of yarn, and the question was how many of each yarn, so I have my standard blend and I have my deluxe blend. I'm going to just set up information in a chart as a way of organizing. So in the first sentence I have 30% acrylic for the standard blend, 30% wool in that blend, and 40% nylon in that blend. Then I have the word and I'm moving to the deluxe blend. So again, same pieces, 9% acrylic, 39% wool, and 52% nylon. So these are just the details of each blend. I may or may not be using all of them. It depends on the question. So let me adjust my slide a moment there to have a little bit more room to work. And what I read in this problem is that I'm to have at least 20% acrylic. So I really need this one brand, and I'm going to pick standard brand because it came first, to be my X. And that really stands for pounds because the question asked me how many pounds. Same idea here with the deluxe blend, so that's going to be my Y, and that really stands for how many pounds. And then on both blends, focusing in just on the acrylic. So since I want at least 20%, I have here 20% plus, and that is of the acrylic. Now I have my X and my Y, and I have the percent, so I'm going to convert percents to decimal. So 0.3% of is multiply, so I multiply that times the X. I'm going to add to that the other blend, so 9%, make sure you move your decimal two places, 0.09, and that is of the Y, so times Y. This has to be 20 plus, so this amount has to be greater than or equal to 20%, so 0.2. But a percent always has to be multiplied by something. So 20% in that final fabric, and in that final fabric are the two blends of wool or of yarn, so times X plus Y. So that X plus Y would be the total pounds in that final fabric, and then 20% of that total. So that's why I'm multiplying the 20% times this. In order to solve this, I need it to be in slope-intercept form, so Y equals format. So I'm first going to have to distribute this. So 0.3x plus 0.09y greater than or equal to 0.2x plus 0.2y. Now I want to combine like terms, and I know my writing's a little iffy here. I'm writing with a mouse today. So I'm going to get my y's over here on the left, and so I'll subtract 0.2y from both sides. And feel free to use a calculator to do this. So I have from that 0.3x, and this is negative, so minus 0.11y greater than or equal to 0.2x. And then I'll move my x piece over to the other side, so minus 0.3x on both sides to keep my equation balanced. And from doing that math, I have negative 0.11y greater than or equal to, and this is a negative as well, negative 0.1x. Last step is I need to divide on both sides by this decimal, so divided by negative 0.11 on both sides. And so on this side, these are going to cancel, and so I'm going to get y. Now I did divide by a negative, so I need to flip my inequality sign. So this flips to less than or equal to, and I'm going to get my calculator to do this. So on my calculator, I have negative 0.1 divided by negative 0.11. Enter. Ooh, big long decimal, so I don't really want that. So I'm going to push my math button and change that into a fraction so that I have a bit easier number to work with. So that is 10 over 11, and that is positive for my x. So I have 10 over 11 x. Now I don't have any b values, so that means the b value is really 0. That's why it's not written. So I'm going to go back to my calculator to look at graphing this. So on my calculator, I go to my y equals. I type my equation, so 10 over or divided by 11 times x, and that's my whole equation. I did have to flip my inequality sign here, so I'm going to get my calculator to shade for me. And so I go over here to this line in front of the y1. I'm going to push enter until I see shading below, because we have this less than at this point. So there's shading below. Now my y-intercept is 0 here, and so my calculator, I'm going to graph it in the normal standard window and just see what shows up. And I know my line was going to go through 0, 0, and there it does, and I see all the shading. So this shading is if I was doing a pure algebra problem, because that's how my graphing calculator thinks. I'm going to draw a picture, and on my picture, I'm going to shade just slightly differently. So keep this picture from your calculator in mind, because as I'm using my writing tool, I'm not able to see my calculator completely at the same time. So I go to write, and I have my x and y axis. Here's my y-axis. And here's my x-axis. Now you'll notice immediately I didn't draw my axis in the center, because in real life we're not going to use negative amounts of x or negative amounts of y. So I draw my line. My line went right through the origin up like this, and it was a solid line because we had the equal to. And the shading is below that line. However, because it's real life, I cannot use negative amounts. So these numbers have to be bigger than 0, have to be confined to the first quadrant. So my shading, oops, it got down a little bit low there, but my shading is only in this first quadrant, because it does not make sense for my y, my deluxe blend, to go into the negative amount. Does not make sense for my x, my standard blend, to go into the negative amount. So I have this triangular region. It truly does continue on to infinity out this direction and up forever. And as long as I pick an ordered pair, any ordered pair in the world in this region, it meets the criteria that I will have at least 20% of acrylic in that final mixture. The ordered pairs would give me the amount, the x and the y, the pounds of each type of wool.